The Chihuahua is perhaps one of the most recognizable of the hundreds of dog breeds out there. They are scrappy little things, and according to most, the smallest breed of dog in the world. How these things descended from undomesticated wolves stands as an amazing testament to how crazy biology and evolution can get, even in just a short amount of time, when directed by humankind. But that is perhaps a story best for another day. Breeders claim the Chihuahua can claim direct descent from dogs kept as pets by the ancient Toltecs, and maybe cultures more ancient than even them. As Columbus and the other European explorers that followed him learned, the Americas and its native inhabitants differed from Africa, Asia, and Europe in the sense they lack many of the domesticated animals familiar to them. Horses, pigs, chickens, cattle, goats, and even house cats were, prior to 1492, completely alien to the Native Americans, with the colonizers from the east bringing these animals with them. The one thing the natives shared with the European conquerors, however, were dogs. But the story of these animals and what happened to them is something scientists and historians are still struggling to grasp and understand. Hello there guys, and welcome back to another installment of Trey the Explainer. The triumph of the dogs. Canines, or as I like to call it, a dog, have shared a long history with us strange bipedal monkeys for tens of thousands of years, to the point the bonds we humans have formed with cats and horses would look like meager footnotes by comparison. All the dogs of today were domesticated from wild Eurasian wolves. The exact timing and location of dog domestication is largely a mystery. It might not have been a single event in a single location, but several. Though it most likely occurred in Western, Central, or East Asia, sometime between 15,000 to 30,000 years ago. Wherever it occurred, it did so in the Old World, when humans were beginning to migrate to other parts of the globe, the humans taking their domesticated buddies with them as they did so. They notably bred them into different populations, favoring certain traits over others to best suit the jobs given to them by the region. A longer snout, a flatter face, poofy fur, a desire to bring things back to their owners. Over the ensuing thousands of years, dogs have been incorporated into almost every human society all around the world, in a myriad of diverse and unique forms, from hunter-gatherers to state-level societies. From the Egyptians and their extinct Tessum, to Polynesians and their Kori, which were brought on voyages across the Pacific Ocean, to medieval Europeans with their game dogs, hounds, and retrievers. And the Americas were, and still are, no different. The breeds of America. European colonists, bringing their own dogs from the Old World, noted that the countless indigenous societies and cultures of the Americas already had their own furry, not that kind of furry, pets as well, prior to their arrival. In many ways, the use of dogs in the Americas before contact very much paralleled their usage in the Old World. Descriptions made by these explorers tell us that the Native Americans created many distinct breeds from these animals to best suit their needs. On the Great Plains, village dogs were known to participate in hunts for small animals like rabbits. In the north, the Tahltan Bear Dog was used by some cultures to hunt animals many times larger than themselves. It is said that though this breed could be gentle and kind to smaller animals and humans, it had enough courage to face a fully grown grizzly, recalling the tales of the Rhodesian Ridgeback breed of the Old World's ability to keep lions at bay. The small dogs would be carried in pouches by humans during hunts, only to spring out and attack when the prey was spotted. The Chiribaya, or the Peruvian Shepherd dog, was used by the pre-contact Chiribaya culture of Peru for the purpose of a herding dog, a New World analogy for the Border Collie breed. Only in America, it guarded llamas and alpacas instead of sheep and goats. The Innu of eastern Canada used the Innu canoe hunting dog, a small breed that would sit in the belly of the canoe and jump into the water to catch shot fowl, only to return to the vessel with the bird in their jaws, much like a golden retriever. Other uses for dogs by First Peoples baffled and shocked European societies during the era of colonization. Dogs throughout the Americas were often used as pack animals, notably as sled dogs, most likely substituting a role held by horses and cattle in the Old World. The Greenland dogs, Malamutes, and Huskies, strong and reliable, and used primarily in the icy north amongst the Inuit peoples. One observer, when noting the dogs of the Dakota people, said, "The number and utility of these faithful dogs is sometimes astonishing, as they count hundreds, each bearing a portion of the general household goods." Dogs were also used for various religious ceremonies and medical purposes throughout the New World. Chihuahuas, in addition to a use I will address in a second, appear to have functioned as hot water bottles, relieving and dispersing pain to injured areas, with their application to a painful or ill region believed to heal that region amongst the Aztecs. The Salish Wool Dog of northern British Columbia were prized by the Coast Salish peoples. Great lengths were taken by these societies to keep populations of this breed as pure as possible, sometimes keeping them on isolated islands or in fenced-in caves to separate them from other breeds, feeding them raw and cooked salmon as well. Seems a lot of special treatment for a dog as small as a Pomeranian. Well, as it turns out, because the Salish peoples had no domesticated sheep to use and wild goats were far too difficult to catch, wool dogs were often used for just that, for their wool. Every year in May or June, the little dogs would be sheared, and their fur used to construct greatly sought-after ceremonial blankets. So good were these dog hair blankets that some say they could be as valuable as a human slave. One use of dogs by some Native American societies that revolted European onlookers was that of dog meat in food. The consumption of dog meat in cultures throughout the world and throughout time has varied greatly. Just like with many foods, norms associated with what foods one can and cannot eat is largely culturally determined. Just look at cattle meat in today's societies. European society generally found the consumption of dog meat to be considered a major taboo, even during times of famine. For example, William Clark on the expedition, unlike Lewis and the rest, refused to eat a dog even during a period of starvation due to cultural reasons. Some cultures in the Americas held very similar views. The Comanche, for example, saw dog meat as a forbidden food and its consumption as taboo. Other cultures saw dog meat as a delicacy only to be eaten at certain times of cultural significance, and others still consumed them on a more regular and routine basis, with varying degrees of all in between. Hernan Cortez, if he can be trusted, wrote that the little dogs, most likely those tiny adorable Chihuahuas, were raised by the Aztecs alongside rabbits and deer for eating, suggesting those little buggers were originally used for a very different purpose, just like guinea pigs once were. Yummy. Jokes aside, it is important to try not to judge these societies on this ground. An anthropologist must look at things through the lens of cultural relativism, where societies make sense within their own cultural context, and there is not a right way to do things culturally speaking. We only find the consumption of dogs and guinea pigs gross because we are part of a society that considers that taboo. Our minds are indoctrinated to think that this is the correct way to view the world. An Aztec might note the same thing about us when looking at some of the weird stuff we eat. An interesting example of this can be seen in the account of Fanny Kelly, who was held captive and lived amongst the Sioux of the Great Plains. If her account can be trusted, she found her captives' treatment of their companions paradoxical. How could they love and value their companions so much, yet eat them at the same time? Perhaps an outsider to a society can never truly understand. North America even has its own dingoes, wild dogs, without owners for centuries that roam mostly the isolated forests and swamps along the Georgia-South Carolina border. The Carolina dogs, or the American dingoes, are a shy and reclusive breed that prefers to keep to the wilds, as they have done for many years. And there were other kinds still, and likely ones never properly recorded by European observers. All these being dotted across the tundras, plains, mountains, and valleys, jungles, and deserts of pre-contact Americas. These dog breeds are known to science collectively as pre-contact dogs, or PCDs, and as we will discuss later, are set apart from all other surviving dogs out there, particularly those of the Old World. But as you may have noticed, most of these breeds are no longer around today. What happened to them, and where did they come from exactly? Dog-eat-dog world. With their horses and their guns, the Europeans brought with them germs, and we know that the human inhabitants of the Americas suffered greatly for it. Before Columbus, the two continents were filled to bursting with probably somewhere between 10 to 100 million people. The exact calculations are unclear. Within a few centuries after contact, that number was in the hundreds of thousands. So potent was the power of diseases completely unknown to the New World and its people. There is a lesser-known side to this story, with a lesser-known victim, however. The humans brought human diseases, and so did the animals bring animal diseases. The European dogs carried with them Old World bacteria and viruses that ran rampant and likely decimated the populations of pre-contact dogs. The simple explanation is that by the time colonists arrived and took the time to observe these Indian dogs, they had largely been driven to extinction and subsequently replaced by the new European dogs that had been imported, with some intermixing of the two populations occurring as well. A situation that is startlingly similar to what happened to the humans of the New World, their owners. The specifics of this period are poorly understood, even to this day, but one thing is clear: pre-contact dogs vanished almost completely, on a scale even worse than their human owners experienced, with apparently only a few holdouts that built up an immunity to these diseases and endured. This eradication of pre-contact dogs might have been more than just disease-driven, with some historians suggesting European attitudes might have driven the favoring of Old World lineages over new ones, as well as the quote-unquote persecution of said lineages. In any case, it appears that these rare few survivors include Alaskan Malamutes, Inuit sled dogs, Greenland dogs, Chihuahuas, the hairless dogs of Central and South America, and lastly those feral Carolina dogs, though recent evidence might contest this. Despite these select few, all the other dog breeds of the New World, the wool dogs and bear dogs and canoe hunting dogs, became extinct and no longer exist for us to admire. And what a shame that is. Nowadays, all but a tiny fraction of the dogs you see walking down the streets in American cities, or neighborhoods, or parks, are descended from these legendary pre-contact dogs. The vast majority will descend from Old World breeds in stock, primarily European. An entire race of creatures disappearing from the earth. Crazy to think that what happened to humans on a macro scale was essentially exactly what happened to man's best friend. Origins. Where did these dogs come from? The origins of these vanished pre-contact dogs were the subject of debate for centuries. Many of these Native American dogs before their full disappearance was noted by early European recorders as distinct from the dogs brought over from Europe, Africa, and Asia. Native American dogs on the Great Plains were said to resemble and sound like American wolves. The canines of the Arikara people, for instance, were described by ones as nothing more than the domesticated wolf. I have often mistaken wolves for Indian dogs. Another noted their voice is not a proper barking, but a howl. Some believe the dogs were partly descended from wolves that have mixed with the dogs. And for a while, scientists thought similar. Where exactly do these animals come from, and how did they end up in the Americas? Well, up until recently, two theories were put forth for their origins. It was often speculated that the dogs of the Americas were descended from American wolves, which were then domesticated by the indigenous humans independently from those of Eurasia. And, rather than descending from the Eurasian wolves of the Old World, they descended from American wolves. Others held to the theory that these pre-contact dogs were in fact closest related to Eurasian dogs, and were only brought to the Americas alongside with the Native Americans when they entered the continent sometime around 30,000 to 15,000 years ago, across the Bering Land Bridge from Asia. It was only with DNA testing centuries later that the true origins of these doggos was determined. Surprisingly, much of this testing was only conducted a few years ago, one of the most intriguing studies to date only being published last year. During such studies, DNA was extracted from mummies, skeletons, and other remains across the Americas belonging to pre-contact dogs, before they declined in populations or became extinct, which were then compared with that of living dogs in homes, villages, feral populations, and so on. Wolves, both Eurasian and American coyotes. Several fascinating things, some of which greatly unexpected, were discovered through such testings. First of which was that the latter theory of pre-contact dog origins was correct. Pre-contact dogs were in fact closer related to Eurasian dogs than they were to American wolves. The dogs of pre-Columbian America are in fact dogs from the Old World brought to the New, albeit through a different route than those the Europeans brought over. However, from there, things get slightly more complicated. The genetic evidence showed that not all pre-contact dogs were the same. There were notable distinctions between the Arctic dogs of the north of America, notably Greenland dogs, Alaskan Huskies, and those of more southern regions. Geneticists determined that domesticated dogs entered the Americas through a series of at least 4 independent migrations that created these genetic distinctions in New World dog populations. The first migration they noted was the one that brought over what can truly be called the original, quote-unquote, pre-contact dogs. These dogs were closest related to the prehistoric remains of the 9,000-year-old dogs unearthed on the Siberian island of Zhukov in northeastern Asia. This seems to suggest that much like their human owners, pre-contact dogs originated from populations from Asia, the canines themselves likely originating from somewhere in northeast Asia. These dogs appear to have been brought into the Americas after humans had already settled on the continent, splitting from their Asian cousins sometime between 500,000 and 13,000 years ago, and remaining in relative isolation. This population appears to be the ancestors of everything from the wool dogs of British Columbia, to the wolf-like dogs of the Great Plains, to the Chihuahuas of the Aztecs. A second independent migration occurred around 1000 CE, when the Thule culture reintroduced dogs again when they migrated once again across Asia and into the Arctic. Many Arctic dogs, particularly those of Greenland populations, are the descendants of this reintroduction. Though these Arctic dogs were very closely related to the pre-contact dogs of several thousand years ago, coming from Asia once again, they were genetically distinct from them, and it shows. The third migration was that of European dogs across the Atlantic, which we spoke of earlier, carrying diseases that decimated populations of the prior two migrations and later replacing them. The fourth and last migration was that of the Husky dog during the early 1900s. Siberian Huskies, once again brought from northeastern Asia, were introduced into Alaska in response to the Alaskan gold rush, which attracted miners and workers from across the Bering Strait. I told you things get complicated, but the DNA found in these dogs records this long, complicated history, and it's fascinating. Now, the other very curious and somewhat perplexing finding these studies have found is how little of these initial prehistoric pre-contact dogs survives within dog populations today. Scientists were somewhat surprised to discover that almost no dogs alive today are descended from pre-contact dogs, or have any trace of their DNA. Shockingly, this was true even for many of those quote-unquote surviving authentic indigenous breeds. I quote, "The majority of modern American dog populations, including 138 village dogs from South America and multiple quote-unquote native breeds, possess no detectable traces of pre-contact dog ancestry." A further study sampling 590 individual dogs only found 2 modern American dogs, a Chihuahua and a mixed breed from Nicaragua, that carried the mitochondrial haplotypes indicative of pre-contact dog ancestry. This suggests pre-contact dog ancestry only accounts for less than 2% of all modern American dog populations. European dogs have almost completely, to a startling degree, replaced the original indigenous dogs, which have virtually vanished genetically. This is very strange, as it seems to paradoxically imply that the few surviving quote-unquote native breeds are in fact fakes with minimal to no genetic traces to their ancient pre-contact roots. From ancient artwork and accounts, we know that these breeds, like the Chihuahua, existed long before contact, but the surviving representatives don't appear to be pre-contact themselves. They're largely, if not entirely, European. They're fakes, at least they appear to be genetically. The few American breeds that can claim descent from pre-contact dogs, at least for the moment, are Carolina dogs, Alaskan Huskies, Alaskan Malamutes, Greenland dogs, and of course those yummy little Chihuahuas. They appear to be authentic, but only with traces of their original heritage, largely watered down by the European replacers. The hairless breeds of Mexico and South America, and the yellow dogs of Peru, claimed to be the descendants of the Chiribaya dogs, have been so far shown to be of European heritage, with no detectable traces to pre-contact mummy specimens and skeletons. It's pretty dang weird. Are these Native American breeds even Native American after all? The historical evidence shows they are. However, the modern versions of these breeds don't appear to be, despite the resemblance. Pre-contact dogs are still around us, just incredibly rare, and almost undetectable in the modern day. But perhaps the strangest discovery concerning these Native American dogs has to be that of CTVT. How a cancer has preserved an entire lineage. Canine transmissible venereal tumor, or CTVT, is a type of contagious cancer clone that can be spread between canines during mating. It's effectively the worst STD out there for dogs because living cancer cells can be transferred from one individual to another, infecting them with the clone after which the process is repeated. The clone keeps on transferring and transferring from one to the other, like Cheap Trick. It's hard to describe for us humans because at least at the moment it's not something our species has to worry about, because it's not really a disease of the viral or bacterial variety as we know them. Essentially, what happened was somewhere in the distant past, a single quote-unquote founder dog, let's just say his name is Chad, possessed a tumor cell in its body through a mutation. This cancer cell replicated and replicated, growing into a tumor. Now, these tumors contain this dog's DNA, and are technically a part of that dog in the same way your liver or heart is, but these tumors were rogues. When this dog mated, and we know Chad did, through some special means, tumor cells transferred to his partner and lived off the other animal, after which the process repeated by jumping to another host through more mating, the cancer continuing to create clones of itself on each of its hosts, and so on and so on and so on, all the while remaining genetically unrelated from said hosts, all these cancer clones containing Chad's original DNA. This cancer, known as CTVT, has essentially become a unicellular, asexually reproducing pathogen, despite technically being a type of dog. Though it functions more like a virus now, and it only appears as a disgusting growth, its DNA is dog DNA, and this gross cancer is, at least genetically, a living thing, just like your little pupper. Despite the original founder dog Chad itself dying thousands of years ago, clones of its cancerous cells are still circulating and replicating alive and well to this day. The founder dog has effectively become immortal, Henrietta Lacks style. Imagine if your finger was cut off but kept on creating more and more cells that had your DNA long after you died. CTVT has spread amongst dogs all throughout the globe, from the Americas to Europe to Asia to Africa to Australia, and the contagious cancer continues to spread right this very moment. You might ask what all this has to do with pre-contact dogs. Well, as geneticists have found through analysis of the DNA of the cancer, the founder dog from which the cancer originates and possesses its DNA is prehistoric. CTVT is the oldest cancer known in nature, with the founder dog likely living around 11,000 years ago. Comparing the CTVT founder dog's DNA with other dog breeds, I guess this cancer is technically a breed of dog, get on it American Kennel Club, found that the founder dog was in fact, drumroll please, closest related to pre-contact dogs, if not being a pre-contact dog itself. That's right, baby. A weird, contagious cancer has more authentic indigenous ancestry than your Chihuahua. This cancer still has the DNA that once belonged to an individual Native American dog, or a dog extremely closely related to them, and still, after all these years, is still technically alive. Its cells and technically a part of its body are still living. A cancer circulating around the world, jumping from host to host, is one of the last remaining trace of its kind, the sole pure-blooded survivor of the Native American dogs. Imagine that. Ironic that diseases and viruses almost eliminated the Native American dogs, and yet it is a disease that is one helping to preserve them. I guess it's the Native American dog's revenge, though they have almost completely been replaced. Because one of them decided to turn into a unicellular pathogen, a part of their lineage lives on and inflicts itself on the conquerors themselves. Sounds like something straight out of science fiction. I'm reminded of dystopian futures where people upload their consciousness to computers in hopes of preserving themselves. The founder dog, I guess, has done something along those lines. Isn't biology fascinating and more bizarre than you ever would have dreamed? And so the CTVT cancer clone endures, forever infecting and replacing itself for the foreseeable future, if not eternity. The founder dog lives on, Chad, a remnant of this once diverse and great branch of man's best friend. So there you have it, the weird, tragic, and yet confusing story of the Native American dogs. We are still just beginning to scratch the surface of this mysterious and cryptic breed that has been largely lost to history. So hopefully we'll only learn more from here. Alright, thank you for enjoying this installment of Trey the Exploiter, and I hope you learned something new and enjoyed the show. Subscribe for more. Bye! Come run the hidden pine trails of the forest. Come taste the sun-sweet berries of the earth. Come roll in all the riches all around you, and for once never wonder what they're worth.